But 30,000 a year, that's staggering. So why do they take it off? I mean, why do they take the blade guard off with their saw? Hello, this is Henry with Woodworking by LPI, and today we're going to talk about the blade guard on your table saw. There seems to be a lot of mystery surrounding the blade guard on the table saw, because if you look around when you see people using it on videos or training or whatever, guess what? That blade guard's gone. Well, not all of them, but a lot of them. So I was curious, I was curious as to whether or not it was needed. Well, of course it's needed, but why do they take it off? Why do they take the blade guard off with their saw? So we're going to be looking at this specifically right here. And as you can see, we are unplugged. All right, so we got to think safety, of course, all the time. But why do they take the blade guard off? It just doesn't make sense. So today we're going to kind of go through and take a peek at why they would take that blade guard off and why it makes sense in some respects. So let's get into it, all right? Okay, so all table saws when you're buying new, unless you bought it used or an older model, includes a blade guard, and it also includes a riving knife, which is back here in the back, or a splitter. And the newer models are going to come with them either way. When you purchase them brand new, they're going to come with these. The manufacturer provides them. It's in accordance with the government standards on safety for this saw. Shocking fact, if I can give you up front, the government on the health standards, or I believe it's health standards, records 30,000 accidents a year with table saws. So kind of makes sense that there's a blade guard there. Now, this is mostly due to, I won't go into kind of accidents they have on it. You can imagine, I'm sure. But 30,000 a year, that's staggering. So I thought it'd be good to kind of give a little bit of beginner information with regard to the blade guard itself, not necessarily the saw. I may be able to come back and do one on the saw, but I'm particularly wanting to look at the blade guard, because when I saw that number, it was just mind-blowing. It's like, wow, who'd have thought, But if you go out to YouTube and you look around and you see a lot of woodworkers, you don't see a blade guard on the table saws. And I always wanted to know why. Why should you remove that? And if you do, what do you need to protect yourself? What do you need to look at, other than the obvious of cutting your finger off, which is not a good thing? Why would you want to take that blade guard off? Okay, but let's look at the pros of why the blade guard is on first. Okay, so we'll take a peek at that. I'm going to use a piece of wood here that kind of scrap around the shop, and let me go into the particulars of the blade guard itself. Okay, so a lot of blade guards don't necessarily protect your fingers. They're not designed necessarily to protect your fingers, and I know this kind of sounds shocking, but they're more designed to give you awareness of where the blade's at. And more importantly, the number one reason that they create the blade guards is for kickback. Okay, because this blade is spinning so quickly because this is a precision tool and it's very fast. It cuts very fast. So the risk of it kicking back a piece at you is great. And that's mainly the reason for this, is to keep this board from flying back at you at a really fast speed. And I'm not going to demonstrate that for you, but I do have a video that shows what kickback looks like, and I'll put that in right here.
First from above in real time. When I get the board near the back of the blade, I was going to turn it just slightly, and as soon as it grabbed it, I couldn't stop it. And you'll notice that my backstop is gone, and so is the piece of wood. Now I'll slow it down a bunch, and you can see how close my hand comes to the blade, even though I was actually trying to pull it back towards me. I'll say it again. You only think that you can get out of the way of something like this. Now we'll watch it from closer up, again in real time. Just think about realizing something's going wrong and getting your hand out of there before it happens. You can't do it.
That's horrible looking, isn't it? I mean, to think that that piece of wood come flying back at you like that, I imagine that would hurt. But why does that happen? Well, if you're using your fence and you're ripping, which is going with the grain of wood for length, or if you're cross-cutting, which is cutting across the grain, and you're pushing that along, I have this distance here set up intentionally a little wider so it kind of shows a little more of my demonstration point. As you're going down through the saw blade, and you get back here to the back of this blade, specifically back here to the back of this blade, and it happens to twist, these back blades back here are going to toss that board, and it'll come back at you. Okay, which is not a good thing. So that's the main reason for the blade guard, believe that or not. Another good reason for that blade guard is obviously to give you awareness on your fingers as to where you're sawing. So I'm trying to do this all with one hand. So as you put that down, you have awareness of where the blade is from your view. Now keep in mind, this is on the DeWalt table saw that I have here, but I'm kind of using it in a generic sense with regard to, I'm assuming that most table saws are alike. There's different choices, of course, or different options, but in general, they're pretty much the same. So as you're pushing your material through and you're pushing it under, it gives you awareness of where the blade is from your finger's perspective. Now, necessarily, I don't think that as you're using this, sorry about the camera there, folks. As you're using this, you know, it's not going to protect your fingers, but it will protect your fingers from the perspective of if the saw was running and, you know, coming from the top, or you're placing wood off to the side when you complete your cut. Because, you know, we all pull our piece out on the other side, and then we're moving across the saw. Because the highly recommended position for cutting is always off to the side, or using this sled here to push it through. Okay, because you want your fingers away from that blade. And what are you doing? You're putting that thing away. You're grabbing it over here, and then you're putting it away. So this protects you from putting your hands down on the blade when it's either running, or if it's not running like it is right now, that blade's still sharp. So you don't want to put your hands there whether it's running or not. That's the main two reasons for that blade guard. So why would you remove it? Okay, well, let's get into that. Let me get this blade guard off and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, now we got the blade guard off, just right here. Okay, it exposes the blade, and I'm going to show you a couple reasons as to why they would most likely take this blade guard off. Believe it or not, it kind of makes sense. I mean, we think about it, but we don't. I mean, obviously, in the interest of safety, you know, we think, well, that doesn't make sense. Well, it kind of does. So I'm going to put all this back. All right, so first reason that you would turn off or take off the blade guard would be, one, visibility. A lot of woodworkers, despite the fact that they've measured this, you know, several hundred times, I'm sure, obviously at least once or twice, they want visibility to the cut. So as they're pushing their material in to the blade, they want visibility to the cut that they're making. Now, the second reason would be is if you want a bevel cut. So if you wanted to take this blade and angle it, for example, so I'm gonna loosen this up here and I'm gonna move it. So I'm gonna show you the blade there, as you can see as it goes. And that's about 20 degrees on the angle right there. Okay, so as you can see, the blade is at an angle. that guard doesn't work real well at an angle. It may work for a certain point at an angle, but if you're doing 45s, and I'll put it over here to 45, you can see how much that blade is at an angle. That blade guard don't work too well without doing that, setting it at an angle like that. It actually becomes very cumbersome. And if there is a blade guard out there that works with regard to it being on a bevel, they're very few and far between. Most of your generic saws are not going to have a blade guard that'll work with a bevel. Okay, number 3, why else would you want to do it? Well, say you want to use a dado blade for your joints or for your cutouts, you know, for furniture making or putting things together, excuse me. Well, if you put a dado blade in there, most of your guards are not going to fit with that dado blade being wider. So there are 3 reasons that they would remove the remove the blade guard. And I know it sounds crazy, but it makes sense. So what do we do in lieu of the blade guard being gone to make sure that we're safe when we're utilizing that? Well, obviously a procedure and process would be 1. You want to be cognizant of where the blade is in relationship to your fingers. And you want to use the push stick. Let me give you good tips on push sticks. So we'll go with push stick number 1 first. Okay? So let me put this back over here. Yeah, easier said than done, right? Okay, so every table saw comes with a generic push stick. Here's the biggest mistake I see people make with push sticks. Okay, so you got your material. I'm going to take this off here also. This is really fun trying to do this all with one hand. All right, I'll bring that in just a little, bring that fence in just a little bit there. Okay, so I hope you can see this. You have your material and you're getting ready to feed it in. I have it a little bit loose there just for demonstration purposes. And you're using your push stick. Here's the mistake that I see people using with push sticks. See how the material is hanging over the edge here? Okay, so when this blade is spinning and they put their push stick on, they're pushing down on it from a force perspective. Okay, I don't know if you can see how it's rising up on the blade right there. But when you rise it up on that, that's when you cause the problem of binding on the blade, and that's when you're looking at a possible kickback. Remember the video? Not a good thing. So, push sticks are good things, but don't begin to push the material while it's hanging over the edge. Okay? You always want to make sure that it's over the edge of the table. And then here's another issue that I see with people using push sticks. They put it on the side, obviously furthest away because they don't want to be close to that blade, but they put it over here on the side. Well, when you put it over here on the side, see what happens? It pushes that corner back into the blade and it is crooked for one. Now, I know what you're thinking. Okay, I use the fence. Okay. And that's fine, but you're still putting pressure on that back corner. And when it gets back here to the back side of this blade, way back there, I'm sorry, gets back to the back side of that blade, that's when it's going to cause that kickback. So when you're using a push stick, make sure you always put the push stick in the middle of the material, not the side or the side. Make sure you put it in the middle and then push through at an even force on the sides and an even force down to the table, because that's what's important. A push stick is a wonderful thing to keep your fingers away from the blade, but you know, using it improperly can cause problems and cause kickback. And this is what we're trying to avoid. Okay, so let's look at something else. Another tip in using this is control. Okay, and I have down here, you can see that or not, Okay, I guess I'll go with it. I have something called a gripper, okay, and a gripper is a wonderful thing. Now, you want control on this, and from two perspectives you want control. You want control from it going forward, and you want pressure down on the board onto the table to make sure that it's a precise, clean cut, because this cuts extremely quickly, and the gripper will help you do that, okay? So, as you can see, this is the model that has the extension on it, and it has two rows underneath there, two like open areas that you can saw completely over. So if you're sawing over top of the blade, for example, and you have a piece on this side and a piece on that side, and you're using the gripper, you're going across this, it has that open space to go across the top of it, doggone it, I can't talk, with confidence that your fingers are not going to get in the way. You can also use this from a pressure perspective. So you're pulling back your material here. You can use it from a pressure with those the green rubber on the bottom here. You can use it from a pressure perspective, pushing down on the material. See if I can get a good angle there. Down on the material as you push it forward. So this is a wonderful tool. They have different varieties of these. They have different versions. I am not endorsed or sponsored by Gripper. I have no affiliation with them, but it's a wonderful tool. So if you're considering it and you don't have a guard on your blade, this would be something you might want to consider. Okay, so I'll put a link for that down in the description as well, because it's not super expensive, but it'll save fingers. All right, so this kind of summarizes to where we've been. We've talked a little bit about why the guard is on there, and also we've talked about some of the reasons as to why you want to remove it. So here is high recommendations with regard to if you want to remove it. One, you want to be safe, of course. You want to make sure you have control. You want to make sure that you're using the push stick correctly. As well, you want to make sure you have a riving knife in the back of it, which is not shown here, but I'll show you one, or a splitter. Okay, so what is a riving knife and what's a splitter? All right, so let me go get the guard here that I put on the floor. All right. I assembled this for the purposes of the demonstration, okay? But when I use my saw, I use this portion. I typically take away the top portion, but I put this back on the saw. And I may not have this on here, but I definitely have this on here. Okay, and it goes, I could put it back on the floor. It goes back here on the back side of the blade, down here, and it would angle up here. Hence, you know, the knife perspective. Now, why is a riving knife important? It's what keeps the material, as you're going through it, it keeps that material straight when it gets into the back. And that riving knife comes over the edge. So if you're going to run a table saw without the guard, that's fine. I mean, as long as you're doing your safety and all that fun stuff that we talked about. But make sure, I highly recommend, make sure you have that riving knife in the back, okay? And the riving knife is this piece right here. Okay, not including this at the top, but definitely this piece here, because these come apart. Okay, so what's a splitter? Well, a splitter is basically the same concept as a riving knife, but it's a straight piece of metal. It only sticks up so far on the back side of the blade. And at the minimum, you should have a splitter. Okay, because running the saw this way is not a good thing, because kickback is very, 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 very possible. But with a riving knife or at the minimum a splitter, which is a straight piece of metal that sticks up here in the back, it doesn't come over the blade like a riving knife. Sorry, let me get you in a good angle here. A splitter is a straight piece that comes up in the back, and sometimes it could be that tall or it can be that tall, and that's a splitter. Or the riving knife that comes in here also and comes up over the blade. Either one helps you keep control of the wood, keeps it from going at an angle and looking at kickback, okay? So if you're looking at removing your guard, these are some of my recommendations for you. Make sure you have a riving knife and or a splitter at the very least. Make sure you have control of the material going across the wood. Use a sled if possible. or a jig. And that's another reason why you'd remove the guard as well. If you have a jig that you're using on these rails right here, you have a jig, a sled, that guard's going to get in the way. So that's why a lot of folks remove that guard, but yet they keep the splitter and or the riving knife. I would guarantee if you would look at a lot of the woodworkers, they may have removed the guard, but they still have a riving knife or they have a splitter in the back. Some of your older saws don't have it at all. You can buy aftermarket riving knives that can work on either the specific brand, and this one's a DeWalt. So I have a I've looked out and I have a generic one. I have it on my blog. I'll mention that also. I'll put it down in the description, and I'll give you a link also for the gripper, because the gripper is a wonderful tool. And practice safety. Hopefully I've explained as to why some folks, when you see them use their table saws, don't have their guard on, and how you can, if you don't use the guard, avoid, serious pain from using. It's a wonderful tool. It works very well, but let's be safe. This is Henry with Woodworking by LPI, and we'll see you in the next video.